What are some of the takeaways from yesterday's loss? I was the guy, John, who I know you're not a fantasy guy. To put it in perspective, Diggs had 55 points, and I sat him yesterday. That was not a smart move by me, but he had not played that well this season, and yet the Eagles' defense was the one that finally got him going. We kind of were fearful that this could be what happened if they decided to not run, and opened it up. But was that worse than you could have anticipated?
It was a little bit worse. I think I nailed the game, how it was going to go pretty well. And I think the team that masked the major deficiency the best was the team that was going to win. That's what happened. The Vikings max protected a lot. And I thought the Eagles' defensive line actually played pretty well, but they were in max protection so many times, and their receivers just got open because the Eagles' corners are terrible. And the safeties had a rare, really poor game. I would even go really poor, and you don't see that often from Rodney McLeod, never mind Malcolm Jenkins. And so the whole secondary just imploded, and it's kind of what happened. And the Vikings were able to do a decent job helping that interior, which is really bad. And Fletcher Cox beat up Dakota Dozier. He did. If you watch the film, you'll see he dominated him. Brandon Graham inside used Pat Elflein as a turnstile on the one occasion. They did their job, but the max protection and rolling out, it was enough. When you have those corners, you can't cover anybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the question moving forward becomes talent issue yesterday, scheme issue yesterday. It's a Schwartz versus talent question.
Well, it's both. A little from column A, a little from column B. I would say it's more talent. But I will say, and this is what I just put out on Twitter a little while ago, and people don't want to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. If anything, Jim has been too aggressive. With those two corners out there, you got to play cover two. I mean, consistently. You got to protect them at all times, especially when the receivers are like the receivers they played yesterday. You can't, and I understand that goes away from the strength of Malcolm Jenkins as a player who does more in the box, but those guys can't hold up, and you saw it. And I think people forget. I mean, you talk about the two touchdowns. There was a third right before the half that Cousins missed, where Diggs was wide open again on the post, and it would have been a third touchdown.
Yeah,
you just don't see that from NFL corners. And oh, by the way, if you look at the one touchdown where Malcolm Jenkins was supposed to help over the top. When you get a chance to look at that, look at the opposite side of the field. B.C. Johnson is wide open on the opposite side of the field. He's 10 yards ahead of Sidney Jones. He could have picked his poison, Kirk Cousins. Two guys.
Yeah. No, you're right. The touchdown up the left side that Douglas got beat on, that's the one where somebody crossed and Jenkins came up on Thielen, I guess it was, and the other guy on the far side, he just blew past Sidney Jones. He had three guys he could have thrown to on that play.
Yeah, it was Kyle Rudolph and Malcolm. And Malcolm should understand, Kyle's a good receiver, he's a good tight end, but that's not going to be an impactful play. You have to know you have to help over the top, the poor corners, and you're right. The other receiver on the other side of the field was even more wide open than Stephon Diggs, which is kind of amazing. And the first long touchdown was Rodney McLeod. And that was a little bit more understandable because that was Thielen on a crossing pattern. That was just a well-developed play, and it made Rodney McLeod choose, and he chose wrong. You always, as a safety, you got to take the deepest guy. But Thielen's got a big reputation for a reason, so he's concerned with him, and you see what happened. Now, if you want to look at it, if you want to frame it in a positive way, you can say you're not going to face those receivers every week. Generally, NFL teams at least have one good receiver, but to have two at that level, it's very difficult. when you have corners like that. And the Eagles just need, they need Ronald Darby back. They need Avonte Maddox back. They need Jalen Mills back. They got to get these guys off the field. That's the bottom line.
Well, I guess there's a question, John. Are they just saying, look, Darby and Mills stabilize us to get us back to where we need to be? Is that the thinking at NovaCare after watching that? Or do they watch that and say, nope, we need an upgrade and it needs to come from outside of the building?
Well, I think you would love to have a great corner. I think everybody would like to have a lockdown corner. It's easier said than done. You want to give up 2 first-round picks? Understand, you look at how this team is drafted, how little draft choices they've had because they've been in this streak where they've considered themselves contenders. So they've always gone with a veteran player. So if this goes in a negative direction, it could get really ugly pretty quickly because you don't have young players developing. And you haven't had a lot of draft picks. So it's easy to say give up 2 first-round picks for Jalen Ramsey. Would he help you in the short term? Unquestionably. But I think the best way to go about it is, to steady the ship. And they've proven they could win with Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills and even Avonte Maddox a little bit. And those guys are competent if you scheme them up. They're going to look bad at times. They're not great. But they're competent. And what they're rolling out right now isn't competent. And that's my criticism of Jim Schwartz, and that's where my criticism of the scheme comes in. You have to understand they're not competent, and you have to give them help. And too often they're left alone, and you see what's going on.
Right, and I guess, we had somebody call earlier to say, well, Douglas, what's he doing on a roster? I said, well, he's been the best guy they had. I don't think he had a bad day yesterday, but he's been serviceable. Jones has had a rough season, but for the most part, the Eagles want to be in a spot where those guys are rotating in and not getting the majority of the snaps. I don't know what they do with Jones after this, but Douglas as a 3rd or 4th guy, I don't have a problem with that. But the question is, are Mills and Darby strong enough that everything's going to be okay once they get back? And it just seems that they don't have the consistency either that's going to excite people, but can they steady the ship is really where we're getting at.
Yeah, and, Doug talked today. Jalen will be back at practice on Wednesday, but he's admitted, he hasn't played in a calendar year, so it's not like he's going to be able to go out there and play an entire game. So they have to ease him back in.
John, you remember, he was a guy that people wanted off the field last year.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, fans hate Jalen Mills, but I said he's not as bad as you think he is, and you now know that. Especially in the red zone, he's a very good red zone player. A lot of it is just confidence. He really has Sidney Jones just has no confidence as a football player. And you saw Rasul Douglas, and you're right, he hasn't been playing well, but you saw him lose confidence yesterday really, really quickly against a good receiver. And, behind the scenes, I told everyone all summer, the Eagles considered that it's kind of a different category. The Eagles considered Rasul their 4th best corner. And he's fine. You're right, Mike. As a 4th corner, that's as good as you're going to get. That's fine. But now he's a number 1. That's right. Not going to work.
No, he's a number 1 on Miami on that type of team.
Now, Sidney, they expected a lot from Sidney. They thought he was going to be a very good corner in this league for a very long time, and it hasn't worked out. And it's a number of reasons. Injuries are certainly a big part of it, not only the Achilles, but, he's had 4 hamstring injuries. So the latest one was his 4th in less than 2 years. So he's had difficulty staying on the field. From Sean Payton, there's a toughness issue that teams around the league don't believe he's going to hold up in run support. And then there's the confidence aspect of it. To play that position in the NFL, look, if Jalen Ramsey came in tomorrow, Patrick Peterson came in tomorrow, guess what? Those guys get beat. That's what this league is. Every corner. Deion Sanders got beat. The odds are stacked against you. It's like going to a casino playing cornerback in the NFL. Yeah. I saw, you say Stephon Diggs wasn't having a great year. That was more of the Minnesota offense. I talk about Jair Alexander all the time. He's a top 5 cover corner in this league already. Diggs beat him on a post, 50 yards, touchdown. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets beat in this league. So you have to have that mentality as a cornerback to go to that next play, and it's easier said than done. Jalen Mills has it. Sidney Jones does not have it.
Let me get your take then on the corners, the roles that the pass rush had yesterday in the corners. I mean, did they have a good day? Were you? I know you talked about they had a lot of protection, but overall, last week they have 10 sacks. This week we talk a lot about pressure. Okay, forget the sacks. Were they getting sufficient pressure yesterday?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. Obvious would be no, because they didn't get to the quarterback. But when you add in the context of that, and generally you're rushing 4, although Jim has blitzed more this year, I think as a whole, not only yesterday, more than he should, to be honest. And as I said, people are not going to like that. And you
the numbers, by the way, John, the numbers back it, that the blitz has not helped the Eagles' defense.
No,
it's
hasn't
hurt.
Worked at all. Yeah. And then you have to add in Minnesota's playing 12 and 13 at times. Sometimes they're playing 22. Sometimes they got a fullback on the field as well. They have a fullback. And all these guys are pass protecting. And essentially you have 2 or 3 receivers out in routes, and the Eagles can't cover Stephon Diggs or Adam Thielen. I mean, when we talk about masking deficiencies, if I'm, and I know if Jeff was there, he'd get angry at this. If anything, I would have rushed 3 and dropped 8 and just played zone the entire game. And I'm not saying every play. Normally but if you're 3rd and long, I would have rushed 3 and covered 8. Because those guys could not cover those 2 receivers. And I'm talking about the corners. And again, you have bad games from Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod on top of it, which is something you don't expect to continue. But yesterday, then you have those linebackers, whether it's Nate Gary, before Nigel got hurt, Camus, you can put in there as guys who can cover. And you play zone coverage. Yeah. And I think that would have been the better way to go, and that's where I criticized Jim Schwartz and the scheme.
John McMullen, Football at 4, at JF McMullen. What would you say was the identity of the offense yesterday? What was their game plan?
It was a really, really poor job by the offense. And if it wasn't for Carson Wentz, that would have been 38-7, 38-10. I mean, he carried that team in the second and third quarter by extending plays. And they were really pressing. And at some point, Minnesota was leaking oil. And you thought they're going to come back in this game. And they're going to tie this game. And then who knows, maybe the Vikings fall apart. He was unbelievable. But when you talk about extending plays and you talk about schoolyard football, that's not in the game plan. That's Carson just taking over and creating things that weren't there, that weren't designed. The designs were, I don't know if let's put it this way. It's tough to tell if it's poor play design or in fact, it's not tough to tell. I'll tell you, those receivers can't get separation, period.
Right. So let's get to that then. Deshaun, does he fix all that, or is it another level? That does this go down another level of more than just Deshaun Jackson and not having that stretch the field guy?
No, Deshaun fixes a lot of it, but he's not going to practice Wednesday. So now you're on full alert to what's going on with Deshaun Jackson. When is he really going to be back? Is it a sports hernia? Because it's going longer and longer and longer. But if he's healthy, It fixes a lot of the issues because everything falls into place. And you have Alshon Jeffrey back to his more normal role as that big intermediate target. Obviously, you have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, who are very good. And Nelson Aguilar can go back into the slot. And Mac Hollins can go back to special teams where he belongs. I mean, he shouldn't even be playing on this offense. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside should be playing. It's a bad group. And it's a group that everybody overrated, and I will put myself on that category as well.
Why is Arcega? Sorry to interrupt, but why is Arcega-Whiteside? Do they not like him? Is he not as? I mean, do they think he's not as good as Holland? Because if that's the case, that's bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, they obviously think he's not as good as Holland, which is bad. From the standpoint of he's got to be better than Hollins. I don't care if he is a developmental prospect. I mean, this was a high-level player. It's not like the Eagles reached and nobody else thought Arcega-Whiteside should be a second-round pick. He went right where it was about supposed to go, maybe a little high, but not real high. And at sometimes you have to say, okay, this kid's just got a lot more talent, so let's throw him into the deep end of the pool because Mac Hollins can't play receiver in this league. And that's where I would be if I'm the Eagles. Now, you don't need it when Deshaun comes back. You're talking about the fourth receiver, so it's not that big of a deal. But then the second part is Aguilar. I mean, Aguilar is a manufactured touch guy. That's what he is. If you see the bubble screen, you see the fake reverse, and then they get him the football on the flat. And he's a pretty explosive guy. But when he's down the field and if he gets bumped, play's over. He can't do anything. Mm-hmm. So it's a bad group. And when Deshaun's not out there, and also add to the fact that Alshon is not healthy. He's not completely healthy from that calf injury. But he's still a solid receiver.
Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, those backup receivers that we thought were good, they're not good.
No, well, Arcega-Whiteside, now, there was a little back and forth today about why he's not playing ahead of Hollins, and he said, well, I guess we could have put him out there more. But do you anticipate that they agree with you and say, you know what, let's give this kid a shot? Or do you think he's being held back for that drop that he had?
Well, I think that might have been the origination of the fact that Mac is playing ahead of him. Although, I mean, even if you go all the way back to Atlanta in week 2, I think it has more to do, to be honest. You know, I don't think you can criticize Howie Roseman for a lot, although I know he's getting a ton of criticism. But one of the things I've always said is they default to draft picks a little bit too much. Now, they're both draft picks, but they want Mac Hollins to succeed, and he's a veteran guy. So it's sort of a pecking order thing. And at some point, you have to say to yourself, all right, he's a veteran. He deserves a chance. You gave him the chance. Now let's put the more talented kid out there. And the Eagles wait too long. We waited too long with Miles Sanders and Jordan Howard. It was evident what they should have done there. Now it's working. Jordan was one of the bright spots, and Miles was the bright spot. But they're in clearly defined roles. Jordan's the guy running the football. Miles is a great receiver. Can't figure out the running part of it yet. He's just doesn't have a lot of experience and is too indecisive. Hopefully he'll get there. But until he gets there, utilize what you have.
All right, real quick, John McMullen with us here. Overall, was that game yesterday a telling, I don't want to say indictment on the roster? Meaning, you said it a couple times, maybe we've overrated some of these guys. But are we overlooking the whole? Are we looking at the whole 53 and saying, man, we really thought this team had a lot of depth and this? Is there a little bit of an indictment on the roster watching yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a little bit of an indictment of the depth. I think, and they're like everybody else. If you have a lot of injuries at certain positions, and you're down to deep on the depth chart, and I think looked at the Eagles and said things aren't going to get ugly. Well, they were wrong. They got ugly, and whether it's the backpack dance or the Nesty splash with Nelson. People hold on to these highlight plays, and look, they're NFL players. Everybody can make a play now and again, but the consistency is not there. And you see this team trying to use Nelson Aguilar as a deep threat. I mean, we just talked about that second Diggs touchdown where the other receiver was wide open as well. That ball was overthrown. Look at him track that football. Look at him pluck it out of the air. And then there are two occasions Carson went deep to Nelson. He wasn't open on either of them. But look at him trying to track the football. It's ugly. So to put him in that position because he can run fast,
right?
That's an indictment of the coaching staff, because where he does look good is on those manufactured touches. And that's how you should be using.
Well, and look, we've said it a lot, you, me, everybody, that when he's in the slot, he catches the ball in the slot and is able to turn up the field, catch and turn up the field. He gets a good burst of speed, and he can make stuff happen in that motion. He's a slot guy who needs to catch the ball in some space, turn and get up the field. He's not a guy you could just send to do a fly pattern or a post down the field.
No, and they're using him in that way because they're trying to get a deep threat in the offense, and he can run. He's a very fast player. But again, there's more to it than that. It's not just if that were the case, there are a lot of guys who show up at the NFL Combine every year that can run a 4.4.
Well, it's Dallas
there
week.
There aren't a lot of guys who are good deep threats in the NFL.
It's Dallas week. We got plenty on how big this game becomes this week. They lose this week. An ugly game up at the Jets yesterday. We'll have more on that coming up tomorrow. Football at 4, and all of the NFL will be in the books after tonight's Green Bay, Detroit. Follow John at JF McMullen. Tonight, Monday night, at the landmark Americana Glassboro, Tony Bruno and the crew. By the way, they're giving away a trip to Dallas tonight, so get out there for that to go see this Sunday night football game. They'll have it tonight at the landmark in Glassboro. McMullen, Thompson, Bruno, all there for the Monday Night Football countdown to kickoff. Plenty more on tonight's loss, yesterday's loss on that. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, Mike. And Joe Krause would kill me. Must be present to win.
Must be present. You have to be there to win those tickets.